In 1983, Bob Hawke's Labour Party was elected. It signified a fundamental change in Australian society, ushered in by what's called the Prices and Incomes Accord. Go watch that video. One of the big changes was a change in thinking about the economy. Essentially, rather than state direction and regulation, it was now believed that private firms driven to compete in the free market should direct the economy. The logical extension of this was that the government must aspire to always be in a budget surplus, as if they're spending too much, they're crowding out the private sector from participating in the economy. This was symbolized by the national economic policy of the Keating Labor government in 1992, which emphasized this dynamic. This also applied to housing. The government thereafter adopted a diversified approach which brought in the private sector into managing and distributing housing. As such, from the 1990s, all growth in social housing has been in the community housing sector. The other thing that changed under Keating was the public service. The bureaucratic work done by public servants was outsourced to the private sector, turning a significant number of public servants into contract managers. So in this period, not only was infrastructure and services transferred over to the private sector, but the actual workers behind public housing were increasingly reliant on private contracts. But doesn't this sound great? I mean, individual companies competing with each other to provide the best social housing, and it's off the government's balance sheet. Unfortunately, what the economic rationalists found out was, after privatization, the state ends up funding and enabling large private monopolies to dominate service provision where previously it was in public hands. In other words, privatizing public housing is like playing a game of out of sight, out of mind. Sure, they're not paying for it officially, but the government has to come back in informally and prop up what they've privatized, usually costing the public more money. This is particularly true for things that the free market just isn't that good at delivering because they're not super profitable. This was and is true for public housing. While the Hawke-Keating governments reduced funding for public housing, they increased funding for Commonwealth Rent Assistance, or CRA, which is money given to private tenants to help pay their rent going towards a private landlord. In other words, instead of providing publicly owned homes, the government increasingly subsidized the rental income of private landlords. Today, 80% of government spending in housing goes towards the private sector. And that's not even accounting for the community housing sector. Importantly, community housing tenants can apply for CRA, but public housing tenants cannot. As we went over earlier, this is happening in the social housing industry today.